To the bicycle industry and members of the NBDA community, thank you for watching this very special recording of a conversation today with Bob Margevicius, Executive Vice President of Specialized Bicycle Components. The NBDA is thankful to Bob and the entire team at Specialized for their continued support of the industry, retailers, suppliers, and innovation at large. The industry continues to evolve at record pace, with rapid changes demanding us to stay focused on the collective movements of the industry. Retailers must position themselves to be ready to respond to rapidly changing environments. We must keep our community, our industry family, as informed as possible. And with this, came the thought of the conversation for today's industry update. As president of the NBDA, I feel it's my responsibility to share with you what I witness daily. I am extremely humbled by the ability of our industry leaders to come together to watch over and protect our passion for cycling industry health. Daily, I read emails and receive calls relating to working united and what might be coming down the pipeline, all at the aid of keeping retailers and industry members informed so we can react and respond accordingly. We are thankful Bob is joining us today and willing to talk to us candidly about what he is seeing, as well as answer some questions that retailers and other members of our industries have sent me knowing of our talk today. Bob, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good. And, as you can imagine, I'm trying to stay fit. And I just want to continue to just be a competitor in these ultra master's category events. But anyway, I'm doing good. So thanks for asking.
Bob, I'm wondering, have you been traveling? Are you working from home?
Well, that's a great question, Heather. So I have been traveling. As many people know, I was off in Taiwan January through April for about 75 days. And actually, I was planning on doing a long trip to Taiwan in July. And I applied for a special card, which is called the Gold Card, that allows you to have a 3-year work visa. And another benefit is called ARC, which is Alien Residence Card. And it would have allowed me to travel inside Taiwan and really be a part of the community. So I was anticipating actually receiving this gold card in July. And unfortunately, COVID hit. And when COVID hit Taiwan, which was just about maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, the visa office closed and there's no visas being issued to any foreigners just until further notice. So I put the trip on hold. Who knows? So right now, my next overseas trips will be for some speaking engagements actually at Eurobike and the World Cycling Forum, which is in Munich this year, and they're in September.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to getting out and seeing retailers myself. That's an interesting story about the delay and the visa and everything.
Yeah.
Bob, you've been an incredible resource, and last time we worked together, we talked about the challenges, and with challenges come new opportunities. So where are we seeing the opportunities with the challenge this past year has brought us?
Yeah, great. Well, let me first start with the challenges. We're still suffering from supply availability, and much of this really is gated by key components which really have high barriers to entry. And by high barriers to entry, I mean just like products that really involve large, big capital investments. They have guarded intellectual property on a lot of the products. There's sizable labor resources necessary and a lot of scale or size that these operations are. And you can imagine what they are. There are things like drivetrain systems, whether it's cranks, whether it's derailleurs, shifters, those kinds of things, or whether it's front suspension, rear suspension, disc brakes. All of those are very heavily, they involve a lot of big capital investments and big equipment and big machinery to actually invest and scale. And so we're suffering, particularly in those areas. And it's going to take 3 to 5 years or even longer to scale. at some staged level. So we're not going to really see a lot of changes in availability from what we're seeing now for my guess, 3 to 5 years. So, and as far as opportunities, still, even from the most recent sell-through data that's been provided, retail sales are still strong, even as we return to pre-pandemic life. So the bright spot long-term today is, from my perspective, is consumers have a much higher perceived value for bicycles. In the past, we all remember when $300 was considered a premium bike. But today, consumers are really ready and willing to pay $1,000 or $1,000 plus for a quality bicycle. And there are many, many more adults just enjoying cycling today. So cycling has moved in people's perception from a kid's toy that it originally was to a really valuable transportation, recreation, sport, or performance vehicle. So I see some great signs out there of big opportunities that what we're seeing and the activity we're seeing is going to continue.
Yeah, all these new cyclists it's really inspirational. And starting with the challenges, but listening to the opportunities really makes me very hopeful for what the future brings. And I know that you're so close to the data. I see emails from you watching, the data and learning from it. And I know you look at other industries as well. Do you feel like as an industry, the cycling industry in general is adapting and adjusting quicker than other industries, or do you think we're kind of lagging behind? I mean,
well, it's interesting. The supply side really is limiting the opportunities for cycling, but other industries are really facing similar obstacles in supply, and whether that's construction, auto, hard goods, consumables. And I think even today I sent you over an article from the Wall Street Journal on Polaris, which does, they do snowmobiles and motorcycles and boats and a variety of other things. And there was a good example in there about how they too are suffering from some of these supply issues. But, and so we're experiencing a lot of what a lot of other industries are experiencing, particularly from the supply and the component side. But there is some indication right now that some of these industries are starting to experience some pre-pandemic demand levels, with supply being less of an issue. And, we're not necessarily seeing this in the bike industry. And frankly, as I said, from the opportunity side, demand continues to remain strong, and it's much stronger even than pre-pandemic levels. So I think we're adjusting and adapting as best as we possibly can. And the encouraging news is that demand continues to be strong.
Yeah, I love that. We're doing the best we can, right? We don't know.
Yeah.
We continue to pivot, and we continue to have these consumers that are willing to hang in with us. And
yeah.
So, all right, the recent news of the shutdowns with the Kent and Shimano factories, definitely alerting and alarming. Can you comment on what you know, and do you think that what they say at the end of the month will reopen possibly?
Well, I don't really know a lot about this other than these factory closures were government imposed. So that kind of changes the dynamics. And, and even though we've seen this with Kent and Shimano, but for all of us, we've experienced these kinds of things over the past, I would say, either few weeks or even months in many of our supply sources. So factories have been closing and they've been shut down for various reasons. They may not be government imposed, but they've been imposed by some of the factory owners just to ensure that the factory and the workers are safe. So, and these closures, to look at it from the positive side, they really allow companies and businesses the time to institute like procedures to ensure worker safety. And we see this in some of the factories that we're working in, that these closures have really helped them to clean things up, to impose some safety practices for the factory workers, and that it brings a call of attention to these factory owners to ensure that they are safe places to work and that the factory workers are well taken care of. So, and it has resulted in some interesting things. So we're seeing some mass vaccinations within industrial zones, and even for us within just actually today, the 21st, today or tomorrow, we will see vaccinations in one of the big industrial zones that we're producing in as the result of some of these the work outages and stoppages. So, I see it from the positive side, that it will result in some improvements, and that it will ensure worker safety. And I'm not so sure about Malaysia, but what I do expect is that this short-term closures will certainly result in just long-term solutions, and that's a good thing, and it'll prevent these kind of stoppages in the future.
Yeah, it's quick to just jump to worry about how these shutdowns affect our supply, but really we need to think about the people that are involved in keeping them healthy and safe first. Any thoughts about how, we hear Shimano being shut down? Any thoughts about how this might affect us in terms of future supply, or any expectations there?
And I know this may sound like something that's again from an optimist, but these are really seasoned businesses and with really capable leadership. And this is a short-term obstacle. It's going to be a couple weeks, and they'll quickly overcome it. And I expect that over the period of time that they'll implement, various emergency procedures to fulfill the customer demands that they have. And I think it's critical to just realize that they too are losing income, and they're going to try and do everything that they can to recover. So we shouldn't really look at it as something that's really something that's going to have a long-term impact. You just should look at it to say, these are smart people, they're great leaders, and they're going to find and identify ways to overcome this so that we are going to get availability and things are going to be refilled as we need them.
That's a great way to look at it. We all have the best intentions in mind, right? And we're all working towards a common goal.
Right.
All right, Bob, I want to shift a little bit. We spoke about this in your prior webinar that you did with us a couple months ago, but there remains this vocal group advocating for increased domestic manufacturing. I would like if you could just walk us through and remind us the reasons that you consider this a very challenging undertaking, how prices and production timelines could be affected if we were going to head this direction.
Well, the last time I spoke, there hasn't been a lot of changes, but circumstances always do change. And, domestic production certainly is something we continuously revisit, I would say, for all of us in the industry. And, today we're facing some obstacles that are pretty significant. We're looking at skyrocketing freight costs, exchange rate risks, trade conflicts, there's environmental interests, there's government push for local manufacturing, and many other things. And we're also now starting to see a whole drive towards being carbon neutral as a real point for domestic manufacturing opportunities. So I think that circumstances are changing, and as I said, it's something we continue to revisit. But I want to come back to some of the key points that would reflect on domestic manufacturing and what to do and when it would become effective and efficient. And there are a series of ingredients that I think are necessary, and The first one is tariff relief. There are import tariffs on all components, and particularly, I should take that back, not on all components, on most components. And there are Section 301 tariffs that apply to all components coming from China, and that's quite significant. So we would need some tariff relief from that. We do need government involvement and engagement for investing in R&D, and that's, I think, is also an important factor. We need to learn and identify ways to automate, and I was sharing this with someone the other day that, just as a reference point, the average worker in China is making about $800 a month, and the average worker here in the United States working a 40-hour week at let's just say a rate of around $15 an hour is over $3,100 a month. So that gap is huge. And when we look at this industry without the ability to automate and to simplify and to minimize our labor costs and improve the efficiency, it's difficult. It would be difficult to actually compete directly. And, economies of scale are really, really important. And for domestic manufacturing, we're probably going to need a scale of maybe over 3 million or more. And as everyone talks about it, the current output locally is less than 500,000 of the total 20 million bikes that we're selling or importing here in a year. So that's a very small portion, but we do need those economies of scale. And I think the other important things are the manufacturing cluster, which is where all the component makers are located. They're located in Asia, and that means that products have to be imported here into the United States in order to create that opportunity and to simplify the supply chain. And right now, everything is located offshore. We need some big export opportunities, which is one thing that everybody's very excited about here in the United States, but we need to create an environment where the products that we produce and whether we assemble them and how we assemble them, that we can export them to other countries, and that the rules of origin and how we assemble them and produce them, that we can export them efficiently and effectively and cost effectively overseas. And I think that too is important. We need some breakthrough innovations. Right now overseas, there's a lot of innovations that are happening. We need those to happen here in the United States. And I think that all of us continue to invest in innovations overseas rather than domestically here for domestic production. Many people have heard me say this, but in meeting with a lot of government people, there needs to be some financial reward. And as you talk to government and political people within both administrations, everyone's perspective is that we should be producing and we should be delivering here in the United States to be patriotic. And it sounds so wonderful to say that, but at the end of the day, people need to produce something domestically, not only because it's patriotic, because it's a profitable solution, and that we're able to actually build an infrastructure and build a business that's successful. So I think it's more than just being patriotic. And I think the last point is that, consumers have to be willing to pay a little bit more for made in the United States. And as I said, when you look at the gap from China and all of the infrastructure and all the other challenges that we have here, if in domestic production, at the end of the day, consumers have to see a value in made in USA, and whether it's coming from innovation or whether it's just that the quality and how we're able to deliver the product may change, but we need some of that in order to make it relevant.
Yeah, it's so simple to say, why don't we, right? But there's so
Right.
many key ingredients. And, you specifically mentioned the 301 tariffs. Do you have any insights into the possibility of the current administration rolling them back?
Well, it's a good question, and as you know, I'm involved in
Yeah, you have like secret clearance or
helping
something.
the government actually as a trade advisor. So I do have some insight on that. But there's some currently there's really some strong momentum now um, that's gaining some traction within the government now to reinstate the exemptions that expired in December. And these exemptions that expired, they include all kids bikes, which is 24-inch wheel bikes and below, as well as e-bikes. And they're all part of the American Innovation and Competition Act, which is currently under review and in negotiations in the House. The provision itself already did pass the Senate, but it's now being reviewed and potentially being revised in the House. So the provision that is within this act that has passed the Senate, it would retroactively exempt key products that are only available from China. And as I said, that would more than likely apply to those kids' bikes and potentially e-bikes. There's not anything specific, but the initiative itself says to just to exempt the products that were originally on the expiration of December 20th. And the initiative itself as well that is within this bill would apply through 2022 for these selected products. So I'm bullish on it. And I think that there's a good possibility, and it really depends on what happens in the House at this moment.
Some very positive news for sure.
Yes. But I do want to add that just it's unlikely that adult bikes will be exempted, and I think that's important for everybody to understand. There's been a lot of the production has successfully moved to other countries, whether it's Taiwan and Vietnam or Cambodia and Myanmar, but or Malaysia, but so it's highly unlikely we're going to see any changes in adult bikes coming from China.
Well, there's some good news there, so we'll take some positive news.
Yep.
Thanks for the report on that. I know you're kind of involved in that, so I thought I could get that out.
A little bit, yeah.
Are you getting any further positive indicators from component manufacturers and assemblers that we're going to see some capacity, continue to increase or begin to increase?
Well, yeah, from some. And as I mentioned earlier, there are particular components that have high barriers to entry, and there's others that have low barriers to entry. I mean, handlebars or stems or seat posts, some products that really have low barriers to entry where there's lots of competition, definitely they're increasing their capacity. And, what I'm seeing is others are just working to maximize their existing output that they have. And it's, it's what we're seeing that's resulting in long lead times. So if capacity capabilities are increasing only at 15 or 20%, and these factories are maxed out at that level, basically they're taking orders, and these orders are filling production month buckets. And so as the buckets get filled, it spills over into the next month and the next month. And that's a lot of why we're seeing these long lead times. But, we are an ecosystem. And I think everyone needs to recognize that this ecosystem that we have, it's dependent on everyone else. So everyone needs to align, and everyone needs to increase the capacity and the output. So really, at the end of the day, we're governed by the one or two or three suppliers who may be just the slowest to react or the least likely to increase output.
Seems like a huge, huge problem, Bob.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, another thing that I'm hearing about recently is the container shipments. And I know they continue to be a bottleneck. And now I've heard this extra layer that just getting the containers to ship the product in is a challenge. I'm hearing stories from retailers that factories are like having to halt production because product is just piling up and there's no way to move it. You've heard about this. I'm seeing you shake your head.
Heard it, yeah.
Is this going to improve,
yeah.
or what are we looking at here?
So yeah, it does appear that container shipments continue to be a bottleneck. We know that there's an extra layer of challenges related to not only accessing containers, but just getting the container is important. So, we're experiencing container availability issues. We're experiencing higher costs, short turnaround times at the factories, longer reservation timing. We call it getting shipping orders. And there's little optimism that this will really change in the near term. And some people may be aware of this, but U.S. domestic suppliers now are really appealing to the White House. They're appealing to the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, Maritime Commission, because they claim that carriers are refusing export cargo and they're sending containers back to Asia directly empty. At least that's what they're saying. So, all of these individual organizations now are converging upon the carriers to be able to supply adequate containers for space for export. And the U.S. government, if you just look and you step back and look at, how the government is behaving to things, we want to stimulate export. Export is important to the U.S. And import is not so important, even though a lot of these things that the domestic suppliers are claiming are an issue, we're experiencing them in multiples as importers. But the government is going to get involved in it, and the government is going to try and regulate and to try and create an environment where these domestic carriers are able, domestic exporters are able to have containers. So I see this really weighing in going forward in both space and transit times, sailings, and even costs that are going to be impacted. So the future on that is really blurry, but as I said, I'm not expecting that to improve in the near term at all.
So many factors at play, and I'm sure you're just like keeping your eye right on it, right? Because it's a
yeah.
And I was going to ask you, there's so many retailers that are being told that, something might ship and then it's delayed. I was wondering if there's any logistical improvements that might allow for more transparency of delivery times. But after hearing you describe, the unknowns.
Yeah, I really don't have an answer for it. It's surely in everyone's best interest to just implement the logistical improvements at the ports. Congestion is the outcome of a lot of these safety precautions, increasing the amount of cargo and the growing demand for consumables. And, it's another area when you look at these ports, there's huge capital investments that are necessary in order for ports or ocean carriers in order to scale. And we're not seeing a lot of that. And even if we do see it, it still is staged and it could be years away.
Yeah. I'm thinking back when I was working with Eddie Merck Cycles, in terms of shipping costs, when we were getting a container here, I think it was like $4,000 or something, Bob. And now I'm hearing rumors that it's 5-6 times that. Any indication how long you expect these container prices to stay at much higher levels?
Well, based on the White House, the Maritime Committee, I think I think indefinitely, just based on what I know and what I can see, And really, freight costs historically have been low for decades. We could ship a container from Asia to the US, and it would be less expensive than shipping from the West Coast to the East Coast. And we experienced that for decades. And so I think now what we're seeing is some unraveling of that. I think that there's a realization now of what actual ocean freight costs. And I'm not anticipating that we're going to see dramatic decreases over time. That's just my opinion. And it certainly is unlikely that we're going to see prices return and ocean freight costs return to pre-pandemic level. That's highly unlikely. I think that we're going to continue to see ocean freight costs be high and a really critical and important part of our overall cost of goods.
Yeah, it seems to be the conversation as of late is the shipping costs. And some people seem to think that these rising costs are due to suppliers trying to gain more margin, right? Because the market demand is high, right? Why not try to get some more margin? I actually think, being that I've worked on the supply side, you have to take the percentage of the freight into the landed cost, and production costs are higher and transportation costs. I'm thinking all these costs are being passed down, leading to ultimate price increases. Is that actually what we're seeing, Bob?
Well, I want to just be careful with this, but, very few people in particular understand, all the dynamics that are going on. And, we're experiencing, cost increases actually, Heather, in many areas. We've got Section 301 tariffs that expired in December. We've got GSP, which is a tariff-free benefit for imports from various countries, from underdeveloped countries, that actually expired as well at the end of December. That now we're subject to additional tariffs. We are seeing, component cost increases across the board. Weak U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is weak, particularly against the Asian currencies. We're experiencing raw material cost increases. Just as a reference, carton box costs, this just one example, have more than doubled. Rubber and tires have increased also at 40 to 50% for natural rubber materials. We're looking at raw material costs. There's new regulations on processing, on how we process things. We are seeing rising labor and utility costs. And as you mentioned, we're seeing higher freight and logistics costs. So when you consider this, plus the factories that we're all dealing with, and I shared with you that the efficiency gains and the improvements of whether it's 10 or 15% for these component makers, they're the result of these factories working 24/7. And when the factories are working 24/7, that means we're paying premiums for overtime and premiums for workers. And that too needs to be factored into the equation. So, finished product costs have increased significantly over the past, I would say, 6 to 12 to 18 months. And, we're all experiencing these things. It isn't just Specialized, or it isn't just one company or another. All of us are experiencing this. And, we're doing the best that we can to try and minimize them. We are in a supply-driven marketplace. And at this moment, these are costs that we're forced to incur.
So many things we don't even think of. You brought up the rubber, and I was in a conversation with Donnelly Cycling, and Donnelly, they make tires. They're telling me that they're having to raise prices. They're having a hard time getting water to the factories or something. So there's all these things that we don't even know about that's happening.
Yeah.
Bob, if prices go up, what happens when these costs hopefully come back down? Are we going to see prices come back down, or?
And this is, from my 40 years of experience, this is just Bob saying this. Once prices go up, they very rarely go down. very rarely. And, even if they do go down, it's generally a fraction of what the increases are. And, there's so many contributing factors. Makers are contracting for goods and services just on a long-term basis. They're buying raw material when there's such shortages right now. I'm hearing people placing forward contracts for aluminum, for steel, for resin, for carbon, for rubber, far in advance with big contracts, long-term contracts and long-term commitments. So, all of these, and, again, supply is really dictating demand and competition, and what's happened with what's available in substitute. So I think that what we will see is we'll see some increased value delivered through whether it's innovations or customer service, speed to the marketplace, efficiency, some operational excellence, and I think that all of those we'll see as these prices that we're seeing on individual products. There's going to be some additional value adds that I think will offset some of those that are not necessarily product driven, that are much more service and quality driven.
I've seen the industry just rise. We've definitely learned to use our data more, and so I can see what you're saying, that will just continue to evolve. I'm thinking about, I get emails constantly. We get consumers who reach out to the NBDA asking about why is there a bike shortage, and now we're talking about potential price increases. Do you see these factors impeding the potential of continued growth of our industry?
Well, I don't. Personally, I don't. And I think right now, with all the price increases that we are experiencing, we're testing the elasticity of price elasticity at this time. And I think that retail sales will reflect what consumers can pay. And, so, and I point out that particularly, consumers are going to have a certain price that they're going to pay for a product. So maybe, Heather, a couple of years ago, maybe you could buy for $2,500, you could buy an Ultegra bike. And so today, that $2,500 buys you a 105 bike. And, so I think that what we're going to see, particularly at the level of products, that there's going to be a big, broad range and selection of products at different prices and with different costs and with different experience configurations. And I think that all of those will be capable of satisfying the consumer's needs. And so I don't expect that retail prices are going to be a barrier. I don't. I just think that there are so many offerings out there in so many different price levels with so many different product configurations and experiences that it shouldn't present a purchase barrier. And I think that where there may be some obstacles might be at the opening price point levels, where before we could see bikes at $300 or $400 retail. I think those days may be gone, and we'll be looking at entry level bikes in the $400, $500, or $600 price range, and that's really where the impact is going to be on those entry level and opening price point bikes.
Yeah, well, maybe we can have, used bikes to get people involved, and we can come up creatively as an industry. But I definitely see people want to be on cycles. They want to be transformed by this rider experience. E-bikes are the new norm. And good news, I'm hearing from several retailers that kids' bikes are back in stock. Any comments on that, Bob?
Yeah. And I think in one of the other webinars we did, we expected kids' bikes to be available first. And, a lot of this is just driven by the scale of production, the product simplicity. There's not a lot of gears, not a lot of, there's not, I call it spec integrity that's necessary for a lot of the kids' bikes. Component availability, there's a lot of ease of substitution. and individual components that are available from China. And I expect that we'll start to see the supply ease for entry-level bikes, these opening price point bikes in the coming 3, maybe 4 months as well, because of those same factors.
That's great news. Yeah, I thought it was probably because of the simplicity, but I'm very happy to hear retailers are like, we have kids' bikes back in stock.
Yeah.
That's not a concern.
Yeah.
All right, so let's further comment on this. I know you don't want this one, but what
Yeah.
about the stock outlook on mountain road fitness, you know?
Well, adult bikes, and even the most recent sell-through data that I looked at, you know, adult bikes are in short supply, particularly even at retail and at the wholesale level. So, you know, and I expect that adult bikes will continue to be in short supply for the near term. And, you know, demand remains high, and inventory levels at wholesale are at historic low. And just as a reference point, just as a good reference point for everybody, at the start of the pandemic, which was March 1st, call it 2020, from the wholesale level, there were about 600,000 bikes in inventory, 600,000. And as of June 1st, 2021, according to the NPD data of wholesale, there were 57,000 bikes in stock. That's 1/10 of what the actual inventory was just what would be 14 months ago. And you know, and if you take a look at those numbers, you know, sales are tracking at about 220,000 per month.
Wow.
220,000 per month, and receipts. So the amount of bikes that we're receiving, whether it's Specialized, Trek, Giant, CSG, you know, Fuji, et cetera, we're receiving about 200 to 230,000 a month. So you can easily notice, with 57,000 bikes in stock and sales at somewhere in the range of about 220,000, and us receiving between 200 and 230,000, that in order to reach the inventory levels that were comparable to March of 2020, sales, first of all, need to stabilize at some level, and receipts would need to increase by 25% greater than the sales demand, just to have availability within the next 12 months. And that's kind of a reality check for everybody. And when I look at numbers and see 57,000 bikes on hand, and we had 600,000 before, that's a really frightening number. And that's really what's striking a chord, particularly on adults' bikes. So it's really why all of us really need to be watching retail demand. And in particular, we need to watch sell-through really closely. And, you know, I just, you know, want to continue to reiterate, you know, this situation where we're talking about virtually no inventory on hand and people living hand to mouth, it isn't unique just to the USA. I mean, we're experiencing this globally, and the industry globally is having the same availability issues and the same demand issues in almost every other country around the world. So that too is a big contribution to why we're not seeing the availability and why we can't scale up the amount of receipts and shipments that we're getting here into the United States.
It is a global, so it's just going to be time, right, Bob, as we continue just to keep carrying on.
And the market stabilizes at some point in time.
Bob, you mentioned specifically that we're watching retail demand and sell-through very closely. When you say sell-through, that's the bicycles that are actually leaving from the retail environment, right? So how can retailers help you monitor this more closely?
You know, so what it does is it gives us a snapshot of what's happening right now in the marketplace. So And as we continue to see these sales, the retail sales pace at a greater pace than whether it's 2019 or 2020, and we also have a handle on what it is that we can produce on a monthly basis. So we really need to have that sell-through data to understand what the retailers are selling, so that we can, I would just say, dial back some particular product areas that may be cooling off, like kids' bikes. Mm-hmm. And we need to dial up the energy and the efforts and the capacity that we have for other things that may be scaling up. So for example, maybe it's e-bikes, or maybe it's gravel bikes, or full suspension mountain bikes. So that sell-through data for us is really critical.
Yeah, I feel like this is like the time where we need to work as a team. Like I feel like the relationship has been a little strained between retailer and vendor this past 15 months. But this is the time where we need to work together for success. Would you agree with that?
I would. And I first, I do want to apologize to all the retailers for their patience and understanding. We are in unprecedented times, and really, believe me, we're trying our best to really satisfy all of the retailers' needs. And throughout this discussion, you can get at least some understanding of the challenges and the obstacles that we face. And there is a lot of uncertainty. We've got component shortages, price increases, logistic dynamics, factories closures, COVID issues. And really, we have no ability to travel or even to navigate these situations ourselves. So all of us are relying on digital communication. So, and I know I've said this several times, but, whether it's me and our team or other leaders in other companies, we're all, on the phone. We're Zooming every day. I'm on the phone 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week, trying to really press for delivery and production. And, for us too, it's been really mentally and physically and emotionally draining, particularly in this environment, because we too are trying as hard as we can to try and get everything that we can. So, and now today we're starting to see restrictions relaxed. Vaccines are becoming available. Borders are open for travel, and we're now going to maybe enjoy a little more freedom. And with that freedom will come more travel. We'll likely see availability to improve. And since we're not actually there to actually monitor what things are going on, I think that when we have that access, we'll be able to provide more accurate data and better insights on what the commercial situation is, and watch it stabilize. But still, it's going to take time.
Yeah, I feel like this has brought out, though, the best of us. Like, I know, Bob, you respond to my emails like, I don't even know, 30 seconds later. We are all commonly working towards this goal. And, I'm seeing stories of vendors and distributors and some retailers having financial success during these times. But I'm also hearing retailers comment that margins are shrinking, expenses are going up. Increased margins, we know, would help the entire industry, especially I hear e-bikes being a popular spot here for this conversation. Is there any steps that vendors can do to increase the margins that will help retailers?
Well, I'm in contact regularly with our suppliers, and I can probably just give some of the retailers advice that I'm giving to the suppliers, and that's just concentrate on your customer orientation and try and do the best you can for providing great customer care and great customer service. And we're and I think this is also something that from the retailer side is to concentrate on is, being efficient and, working on operational excellence. I think that, today independent retailers, need to look carefully and need to embrace new technologies as they come out, or new products and categories. And as I said, focus on customer satisfaction. I'm really a strong advocate of service, and I think the service opportunities are also incredible. And just align and develop partnerships with your key suppliers, and really focus on selling the experience rather than the component mix of what the product is. And the moment that we start focusing on the content of the product and the component mix, the value proposition drops dramatically. And we're all selling, and I think I've said this to you before, we're in a lifestyle business, and we're all really passionate and we love bikes. So let's continue to really promote and sell that experience, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah, it's about the journey. We're definitely part of it. And, I know retailers are concerned with margins, especially if we have an overstock of bikes, what happens when there's discounting. But based on what you've covered earlier with the adult bikes and the way things are going to, continually just kind of flow in, I don't think we're going to have a huge excess inventory glut. Do you? At least not short term.
Heather, I don't see it. And, today I think we've seen gluts in inventory over periods of time. But today I think, the business itself is global. And, all of us today have really sophisticated data mining tools. We have advanced ERP systems, MRP systems, customer CRM systems in place. And, we're all watching these things pretty carefully. And I'm not convinced that there'll be a glut. And a lot of it also has to do with the global demand. So whether it's if the kids bike business starts cooling off here in the United States, we can quickly transition and ship to other countries where they can't get kids bikes, and maybe the demand is also greater. So as I said, I'm not convinced there'll be a glut, at least for some time, based on inventory and demand. And we will work, all of us will be looking carefully at satisfying just global needs. And I'm not, as I said, I'm not convinced we're going to see a glut in the U.S.
I know, we'll have to watch this recording in a couple of years from now and see how right we were, Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're looking at the future, then the next few questions I guess I would pose to you are about the future. Yeah, I don't know if you can comment on this, but looking at the big picture, in your opinion, will the IBD remain an integral part? So the bikes that are sold traditional into IBD stores, if we take out consumer and manufacturer stores, will the IBD still stay integral over the next 20 years?
So, I'm really bullish on IBDs, now and the future. Bikes are not digital products, and everybody has to come to that realization. Their size, they've got, elegant colors, and, each brand and each model has a performance character and a dimension to it that delivers on that experience. And I really believe that, face to face, that retailers really are the critical element to delivering these basic considerations to the knowledgeable, knowledge-hungry consumers. And I'm a strong advocate of that. And I really believe that that's an important part of just the retail business as well. And just even going a little further, e-bikes certainly, and high-valued bikes do require service and exceptional customer care. And these aspects, they can really only be delivered through retailers. So, just to reiterate, the retailers really need to embrace technology. They need to look at innovations, and they need to just continue to forge strong supplier relationships. And this will certainly carry them and the business into the future. So I'm quite optimistic.
Yeah, and thinking about e-bikes, what do you think the future is for e-bikes? And will bike shops continue to be the predominant retailers of e-bikes in the U.S.?
So this is, again, I'm not a visionary.
I know.
I'm not so much a visionary for the future.
Magic.
But I'm really optimistic about e-bikes. So if you look back, people never believed that cars would displace horses. And nor did anyone believe that airplanes would displace trains. But, for transportation and utility, recreation, leisure bikes, e-bikes are really a natural progression. And I expect they will displace traditional bikes. I'm just convinced that particular aspect of electric bikes will really displace pedal bikes. So, even for sport and performance applications, e-bikes are and will continue to get more elegant. They'll get sleeker, they'll get lighter, they'll be longer battery life, greater range, and they'll integrate, interesting technology that will really enhance the experience. And, my outlook, frankly, is e-bikes could be 50 plus or more percentage of bike sales within the next 10 to 15 years. That's my outlook for it.
I'm really enthusiastic about e-bikes. Yeah, I'm a mountain biker and I'm seeing these ads now. And I think it's a specialized ad, the e-bike that's the enduro bike hucking off a big thing or something. And I'm like, all right, I want that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll ask you some more, in terms of advice for bicycle retailers, getting through the next 6 months, being viable and profitable into 2022. Do you have any tips for retailers, Bob?
It's going to take some commitments to your suppliers and following through. As I mentioned, inventory levels at wholesale will be slim for months to come. And so, my advice is just watch your inventory levels closely, align with your suppliers. And as I said, delight the customers and be really proactive in trying to retain and maintain that loyal customer base. I think that they're going to be the critical factors going forward.
That's fantastic advice. And I'm just thinking back, of my years in the industry. I don't think we've ever focused so much on how we can be excellent retailers as much as we have this past year. And that makes me feel good. I mean, with everyone focusing on this, we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how the U.S. bicycle supply chain might change after this year?
Well, yes.
I'm sure. That's a broad question.
I do think that we'll see long-term forecasting and planning at all levels of supply chain. And, this has been like a interesting time to be in this industry. And what we're experiencing is, as I mentioned in the beginning, unprecedented growth, but we're also seeing an interest and engagement in the investment community in this business. And I think that as we see the investment community come into this business, I think we'll start seeing things become professionally managed. I think that we'll start seeing processes and procedures, and I think that we'll start seeing some pretty deep investments in all aspects of the bike business. I think we'll see those investments, whether it's in investing in retail, wholesale, assembly, manufacturing, and all of those big capital investments and these financial institutions. They're gonna fuel change, and they're gonna fuel innovations, and they're really gonna fuel the excitement and the energy that we all have for bikes and e-bikes. So I'm quite bullish on that, and I'm also very optimistic that it will result in some changes in the supply chain and how we manage going forward.
Yeah, well, while it's a trying time, it's also a very exciting time. And with all this investment, you're right, we can only go to further, better places.
Yeah.
Any final, Bob, I've gotten like an hour of your time. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts, you know, as we look to the future for retailers and our industry at large?
Yeah. You know, one of my famous sayings, a lot of people have heard me say this, you know, so choose whether you want to make news or be news. And you know, that's my advice to everybody. You know, you have to believe, and you have to be, you know, this business is filled with a lot of passionate people. So make news, and try not to be news. So anyway, that's my parting advice to people.
I love that. Bob, I'm sure there might be some retailers who maybe have additional questions or might want to follow up with you. Would you share your contact information?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody can reach out to me anytime.
Okay. And Rochelle and I will share it with the posting. And Bob, thank you. Thank you for coming.
You're
candidly.
welcome, Heather. You're welcome. And thanks everybody for the patience and the tolerance during this tough time. So, you know, we're gonna get through it, and we're all learning from this experience, and we're all gonna be better at the end of the day. So thanks again for the opportunity to actually contribute.
All right, well, very special recording. And if you wanna reach Bob, his cell is 408-607-9499. That's 408-607-9499. And we can share his email. If you send me an email at heather@nbda.com, I will share his email out to you. Bob, thanks again. Have a great night.
All right, thanks, Heather. Thanks. You guys have a great rest of the day as well. And let's have a wonderful holiday coming up, July 4th.
That's right. That's right. All right, Bob, I'll catch up with you soon.
All right, see ya. All right, bye.